On this episode of Healthier Workplaces, understanding occupational toxicology, mechanisms, communication, and hazard prioritization. Coming up next.
Welcome, Renee. Thanks for coming on the Healthier Workplaces show. We're here to talk about the AIHA University's three-part Occupational Toxicology webinar series. And I have to read this. Mechanisms of Action, SDS Communication, and Hazard Prioritization. That's a mouthful. So this series is it looks like it's shaping up to be a pretty essential learning opportunity for OEHS professionals. What's the vision behind this, and what kind of sets this apart from maybe other training programs that are offered in this space?
Yeah. So the vision for this series is to break the mold. For most professional development content, the delivery is in kind of a talking head style, and in many cases, the instructor is reading verbatim from PowerPoint slides. And in my view, this is a missed opportunity. And last week, after our first lecture, it was on identifying and managing occupational hepatotoxicants. One of the attendees provided feedback that they were excited. That's their word. They were excited to attend the next lecture. And this is really the dream, right? To create compelling and useful content that people want to listen to and learn from, and not just clock time or mark time to fulfill credit requirements. And how do we get there? If we look at adult learning theory, we know that people learn by doing. In other words, learning is about mental inquiry, not about passive reception. So to answer your question, the vision is to show that there is another way to deliver professional development content.
So there was a post in AIHA's Catalyst Open Forum
Mhm.
that a toxicologist is asking, "What should I be teaching you?" How did that influence the creation of this course?
Well, so that post was me. I was prepared.
Okay.
I was preparing some educational content for AIHA Connect, which is the big AIHA meeting that was held in May of 2024. And not having taught at AIHA Connect before, again, one of the ideas in adult learning theory is you have to understand what your learners need. And since I wasn't sure, I posted a very earnest question. What is useful to you? What do you need me to teach you? And the response was overwhelming. There were a lot of online responses, but I also received a lot of private emails. And that informed the content that I presented at AIHA Connect in 2024. It in part informed some of the content for this course, is informing some of the content we're proposing for 2025. And then that post is why I got on the radar of AIHA University. They reached out and asked if I'd be willing to do this series. And of course, I jumped at it. As the chair of the Toxicology Committee, I'm proud to lead our initiative to make more toxicology educational content available to AIHA members.
So one standout feature of this series is the way it's structured, right? Because to be more interactive
Mhm.
than a traditional lecture, trying to make it somewhat bi-directional, right? Can you share some examples of how you design the course to keep participants engaged? Ensure that the material sticks. Obviously, engagement's key, right? If somebody's spending a lot of time in front of a monitor, it could, like you mentioned earlier, just watching a PowerPoint slides just doesn't it's not really that engaging after a short amount of time, really.
Absolutely. And, the virtual format is both a blessing and a curse, right? With the virtual format, we can reach so many more learners, but it also denies us that face-to-face interaction to gauge when our students are lost or bored. And so there is a unique challenge to using this format. But with respect to the course, this particular series, again, really looking back at adult learning theory, Jerome Bruner was a psychologist, an expert in educational psychology and cognitive theory, and he outlined 3 steps that we go through when we learn. Acquisition, that is, we learn new information or we refine information we already have. Then we go through transformation. In other words, we manipulate that knowledge to solve a problem or to perform a task. And then finally, we evaluate that information or check the adequacy. So in terms of this course, I didn't open PowerPoint and just start creating slides about the liver. In fact, PowerPoint's the last thing I ever open when creating content, because I do believe PowerPoint can be a crutch. So I started backwards. I first said, what's the actionable knowledge I want every learner to leave this hour with? Once I had identified that, literally written it on a piece of paper, then I asked, what are the activities we can do together, even though it's a virtual format, whether it's doing a worksheet or looking at an excerpt of a safety data sheet, what can we do together so that they are, again, learnings about mental inquiry, that they're thinking things through. And then and only then do I go up to the first layer, which is acquisition, and say, okay, in order for them to perform that task that we're going to do together, what information do I need to convey to them to either add to their knowledge base or refine their existing knowledge? And so the format of the class, understanding that, grounded in those principles of adult learning theory, the class is a lecture, but there's a workbook that we use fairly consistently. My goal was that the learners, the attendees, would spend more time than not engaging in some exercise with me, whether it was a worksheet or, my favorite example is the safety data sheet, right? This is our primary hazard communication instrument. We all need to be very savvy users. And that is the tool industrial hygienists and other professionals are using. So we walked through exercises that would simulate what would it look like on your day-to-day basis? How would you identify a liver toxicant in the workplace? And so we tried to model exactly what you would encounter in the workplace. So that was a big piece of it.
So in part 1 of this series, you focused on liver toxicants in the workplace, and how was the reception for the attendees that were there, and what are some of the key insights that you gained from doing that, getting this first session out and actually delivering it?
Yeah, I've delivered more content in person. This large virtual format is newer to me, and I was humbled by the reception for this first lecture. The feedback, just for the students, if anyone's listening, I read every single verbatim comment, and most of them were, again, it was humbling that they trusted me with their educational opportunity. And I think you touched on sort of what's this liver lecture, what did they walk away with? The truth is the liver was the hero of the story for the first lecture, but the goal wasn't necessarily to make everyone experts in liver. It was really about the actionable knowledge was about showing them how to use their tools more efficiently. In other words, how to take an SDS and extract the information you need out of it more effectively. We walk through steps. Where would it be coded on that safety data sheet? How would you know if something was a hepatotoxicant? Where would you find in your standard documentation, like your TLV book, what would be the hints that this is a hepatotoxicant? I mean, that's an actionable skill you can take right now to your job. The other piece, and this was directly based off that post I put in the forum last year, one of the common questions I got was, how can I tell if an SDS is any good? Because the quality does vary quite a bit. And so we talked about some red flags right off the top. Certain things, if I see them, I don't trust the safety data sheet, nor should you, and you should look for another source of information. The third piece of actionable information, again, it's from that AIHA post, a common question was, can you help me find easy to understand sources of toxicological data? And the honest answer is no. Most sources of toxicological data are not what I would call user-friendly or non-expert friendly. The one exception being the ATSDR tox profiles by CDC, giving them a shout out. Those are very well written, very easy to understand, but most sources of tox data are not what I would call easy to interpret. So what we did instead in that hour, my goal was to show them strategies to decipher and work through those reliable sources of data and not become overwhelmed by the tox speak. So those were really the goals of the liver lecture. Those are skills that we will repeat in lectures 2 and 3. And again, yes, we talked about the anatomy and physiology of the liver, but when you're walking through a facility trying to manage hazard, doing job hazard analysis, you're not going to go, oh, well, the bile duct collects into the gallbladder. That's not actionable knowledge, but those things we practiced can be used in your job every single day. And I think that's really where we need to have a practical view of tying the theoretical to the applied when we're working on professional development in this space.
You did some interesting things in this. One that stands out is you provided the participants with liver toxicant flashcards. So
Right.
flashcards. I mean that's almost going back way back, right? That like in your education days, when we were young,
Yeah.
right? The flashcard mindset, but that they stick pretty well, right? So like, what got you the idea to do that?
Well, so as I was preparing to create educational content for AIHA Connect 2024, I understood that one of the motivations for industrial hygienists, for example, to seek out toxicology content was to prepare for their CIH exam. And I wanted to understand, what does the toxicology content on the CIH exam look like? So I signed up for a CIH exam prep course. I'm never sitting for that exam. But I have now studied about 100 toxicology questions from this exam prep course. And what I recognize, toxicology questions specifically, what I recognize pretty quickly is that exam requires you to have a very strong chemical vocabulary. And what I mean by that is that you can name 3 sensitizers off the top of your head. You can name, 4 carcinogens off the top of your head. The questions are written like, you have some shipyard workers who have developed leukemia. A, B, C, D, which chemical likely caused the disease? And the answer is benzene, because benzene damages the bone marrow, and leukemia is a disease of the blood, and blood is made in the bone marrow. I mean, it was what I realized last year was that part of what I needed to provide these learners to meet their needs was to help them build their chemical vocabulary. And it seems trite, but study cards are an effective way. And we didn't just provide the study cards. What we did first was walk through examples. Yes, there were PowerPoints, not a lot of text on them, but they saw the structure. They understood where this chemical is used, what kind of injury it causes. We looked at the safety data sheet to see how that information is encoded on the safety data sheet. And in the TLV book, there's a lot that's encoded in here. And then once they get to their study card, now this doesn't just feel like some flat 2-dimensional study card they're going to try to memorize. It starts to feel more intuitive, because I think that's really where in the professional space, we're not professional students. We have full-time jobs. We have full-time personal lives. We need to make learning more intuitive and meet people where they are. So that was the idea behind the study cards, was really to help those individuals preparing for that exam.
Part two of the series, which is your upcoming series in the webinar series, goes into more depth on some areas, and I'll let you tell us a little bit about some of the things that'll be covering that. But why is it crucial for OEHS professionals to have a strong grasp, I guess, on all these concepts, but
Right.
particularly what you're dealing with workplace chemicals?
Right. So the next lecture in the series is on genotoxicity and carcinogenicity. And the reality is all hazards are important, right? Every organ is important. I started with the liver because I felt that most of us have some familiarity with the liver. Toxicologists tend to talk a lot about liver toxicity. But when it comes to genotoxicity and carcinogenicity, these are risks or hazards in the workplace. They have to be managed a little bit differently. One, when we're talking about compounds that can cause cancer, often there's such a long latency that by the time we figured out that we've made a mistake or there's been an exposure, it's too late. So in toxicology, most chemicals have a threshold. In other words, there's an exposure below which nothing happens. The prevailing school of thought on carcinogenicity is that for most carcinogens, there is no exposure below which nothing happens or there's no risk. So when we manage carcinogenicity, it's really about titrating down to an acceptable level of risk. It's called de minimis risk. So my point is, when we talk about genotoxicants and carcinogens, there's some different terminology. There are some different concepts in play that it's important for EHS professionals to feel conversant with, so that they can navigate, again, the instruments through which toxicologists communicate with them, which are the safety data sheet, occupational exposure limits. And to your point, all of these hazards are important. We need to manage all of these hazards. And so I picked areas where I felt that there was maybe sometimes some imprecision in terminology or an opportunity to clarify thinking. Not particularly because I think one is more important than the other, but lecture 2 will start with acetamide, which was a compound we talked about in lecture 1. It's a liver carcinogen, and acetamide will carry over to lecture 2. We'll continue on that story. And again, the actionable knowledge that we practiced in lecture 1 will continue. We will practice extracting what we need out of our safety data sheet and out of our reliable sources like our TLV book. We will continue to look for red flags in our safety data sheets. We will continue to work on deciphering the toxicology terminology in just an intuitive and practical way.
Occupational carcinogens are a serious concern for many industries, not just a few. So how will the upcoming session help participants better evaluate and maybe mitigate these risks to protect workers? Are there some practical impact that you're hoping to see from people that attend this session?
Right. In all reality, our EHS professionals already have the tools to manage those risks, right? They're
Mm.
the experts in it, managing hierarchy of controls. The piece that I can help them with is hazard identification and hazard communication. And again, the exercises we go through are about making sure you can interpret what's available to you, knowing when to ask for clarification. And then a piece of it is also communicating those hazards effectively to your worker base. When your worker base is informed of those hazards, they can become part of the solution for their own safety if they understand what they're handling. And so our EHS professionals, they already have these skills. The only thing I can offer is a slight refinement or some suggestions, some additional strategies that might help them refine their game.
Respiratory sensitization is another area with significant implications for worker
Mhm.
health, right? So, how will part 3 of this course help to deepen professionals' understanding of respiratory risks, and what can the attendees expect to take away from part 3 of your series?
Well, so I started out as an inhalation toxicologist. The lung is the best organ in the body. I will just say that's my personal bias. And, um, you know, the practical implications, again, we have to be able to identify hazards in order to manage them. I did leave my favorite for last, though. I think that is the lecture where you will see my most enthusiasm talking about the lung. And I do see in safety data sheets some imprecision of terminology, places where things are called sensitizers, where I'm not quite sure that's precise. In the occupational space, we see these made up words like asthmagens, when we should just say this is a chemical that can cause asthma. And so, I think a piece of it, again, is to make sure everyone is conversant with concepts, they understand the basic anatomy and physiology, they understand how to recognize these hazards and distinguish when maybe they're being overwarned. Because one thing I am not a fan of is over controlling a compound. In other words, don't put it in a higher control situation than you actually need. That does not help anyone. That does not help the worker. And sometimes I've seen instances where, because of imprecision of language, we end up applying more stringent engineering and personal protective controls that may actually be needed. And respiratory sensitization is probably the area where I see that most. So I think because that's the last lecture in the series, I will be frank with you that a piece of it will be addressing all of the comments that students have made along the way. I do read every single verbatim comment, so there will probably be a little bit of housekeeping, but also because I love the lung and I think the respiratory system is fantastic, I think hopefully it will be a very energizing, exciting session. Again, focusing on those pieces of actionable knowledge. In other words, the skills you can walk out of the session with immediately and inform your practice with what we've talked about.
Well, you're definitely, your passion comes through with your energy. Clearly, I can see that this entire webinar series is something this is a passion project for you, obviously. Um,
Well, I will tell you, part of that is because I'm a heavy consumer of professional development content. I'm a board certified toxicologist, and to maintain that certification, I have to take a minimum number of continuing ed courses per year. Plus, we should always continue to build our craft.
mhm.
Unfortunately, from personal experience, I will tell you a lot of the content that I attend is painfully bad. It's someone reading verbatim from PowerPoints
Mm.
for an hour. And I don't care how motivated a learner you are, it is impossible to maintain focus when it's that painful. There
It's
was one
awful.
class
It's just
I,
awful.
I had one class, I was on the waiting list for a year to attend this class. I looked forward to it for a year. It was something I desperately wanted to learn. And when the day finally came, they read verbatim from PowerPoint slides for 2 hours at a time. And that was just such a missed opportunity because these were experts with so much knowledge to impart. And I think that's the other passion behind it, is that these experts who put together the professional development that I find painful, they have so much to give. And those lectures that are painful to listen to, they still take a lot of time to
Sure.
prepare. And
And there's
so
great
my motive,
information there. It's just not being presented in a way that's digestible. But that happens in live presentations too, right? You see somebody
it
comes in front of an
absolutely.
audience and turns around and looks back at the screen and reads the PowerPoint to the audience. It's like, oh, please stop doing that.
My hope, my sincere hope, is that we can show that there's another way, and that I can encourage my attendees to, they know to ask for more. And I think once you know to ask for more, the probability that things will get better goes up. And so that's another big piece of my motivation. Again, as the chair of the toxicology committee, I am just so proud of our efforts to deliver more content, but also more quality content to AIHA members. And I'm just going to put in a plug. The committee this year, we have really been busy. We've submitted proposals for 4 professional development courses. Those are the standalone, either half day or full day courses that are usually the weekend before the AIHA convention. And then additionally, we have proposed 5 educational sessions. So the professional development courses, those are usually an additional fee, where the education sessions, those are 1-hour sessions during the convention. They don't cost anything else. And most, if not all of those, will be virtual this year. So that means if you're not able to travel to Kansas City, you can still participate and learn from this toxicology educational content being provided by the toxicology committee. Again, I just think the passion comes from a belief that ours is an honorable profession. We go to work every day to make people safe, and we need the right tools to stay up on our game. And that means upping our game in terms of the training content available. And so I'm just really motivated to hopefully inspire others to rethink their strategy, and at a minimum, stop reading verbatim from their slides with their back turned to the audience, as you pointed out.
Yeah, that even if you could achieve that, be great. But I think your format here is definitely going to be more engaging, and obviously, if you can engage your participants, you have a better chance of actually making that information stick and be actionable and usable in their careers.
Introducing the AIHA Heat Stress app, your new go-to tool for managing heat-related hazards effectively. Using the Wet Bulb Globe Temperature Index, the app provides precise environmental metrics and even forecasts up to 5 days ahead. Not only do you get accurate WBGT readings, but you also get access to customizable settings for clothing, workload, and real-time protective measures, all at your fingertips. Whether you are working in construction, agriculture, or other high heat setting, this app is your new go-to for managing heat-related hazards. Download the AIHA Heat Stress mobile app and transform how you manage heat stress. Available now for iOS and Android platforms.
One of the things you pointed out was trying to help participants be able to decipher the sources of tox exposures. And let's delve into that a little bit more.
Mhm. Well, so most technical documents are not necessarily written for a non-expert audience, which is unfortunate. I mean, the federal government has had a plain language communication standard since the Clinton administration. And I'm a huge fan of plain language communication. Now, some people will call that, quote, dumbing it down. Don't ever say that phrase in front of me, because that phrase implies your audience is not intelligent. That's not the case. They're simply not experts in the same topic. In other words, their vocabulary is different. And if I can, it's a very humbling story, but I want to share a true story. When I first went out on my own as a consultant about 7 years ago, I had this client, Pete. Pete is an engineer by training, and he is hands down the most effective EHS professional I have ever met. The guy is brilliant. And he had a situation, and he wanted me to create a simple one-page, what he called hazard communication brief. In other words, to explain a very technical toxicology concept to his workers in plain English. Being overconfident, as PhDs often are, I thought, I've got this. I wrote something that I thought was fantastic. I sent it to him, and Pete and I got on the phone the next day, and in his very gentle way, he first said, "Oh, this is great. This is, thanks so much." And then very gently, he said, "I had to Google 2 words in the first sentence."
Oh boy. Yeah.
That
oh
is
boy.
the sound of perception colliding with reality. And that
Right.
was humbling, but it also told me that even though I thought I was an effective communicator, I had a long way to go. And instead of blowing off that feedback or invalidating that feedback and saying, well, it's because he's an engineer, I thought, well, no, he's my audience.
Right.
I embraced that failure, and I joined the American Medical Writers Association to learn more about technical communication. I actually studied the free resources available through the federal government on plain language communication, and started preparing training content on how do you find that common technical language.
Mhm.
And that is something I encourage when I talk to EHS professionals. I encourage them to push back against subject matter experts who speak in long terminology. One of the examples in the liver lecture, central lobular hepatocellular necrosis. Now, that's a phrase that just rolls off the tongue, does it not? And yet that
Yeah.
is verbatim some of the language that appears in the ACGI to TLV documentation. And if this is meant for a general EHS audience, why don't we just say, this is a liver toxicant? That's all that you need to know. And I'm not saying that to criticize anyone. I believe all boats rise with the tide, and that feedback is a gift. And if we can provide constructive feedback and then receive it and really act on it, we're all going to be in a better situation. And so that was one of the big goals of this lecture, was to show them not only how to decipher stuff that's not very user-friendly, but then to feel more confident in just pushing back and asking their SME to say, hey, can you, subject matter expert, hey, can you just phrase that in plain English? Can
Sure.
you, the way my husband puts it is, you need to translate it to human. Can we just put that in plain English?
Well, and that's not dumbing it down. I totally concur with you on that. It's making it, it's taking it and distilling it and making it discernible to the audience that you're presenting it to. That's, that's not dumbing it down. That's making it actionable.
Well, and I think that brings me to, you have to ask, what is your goal? Is your goal to talk over your audience, or is your goal to teach? And one of the things I say all the time is that talking is not teaching. All teachers talk, but not all talkers teach. And if you really want to teach, again, back to adult learning theory, you have to meet your audience where they are. You have to understand their needs, their professional experience, their educational background, what matters to them, and then meet them where they are. If that's really your goal, to educate, which is why a toxicologist signed up for a CIH exam prep course, even though I have no intention of sitting for that exam. I wanted to see the toxicology questions my students were going to be encountering so that I could create content that was useful to them. I mean, I could talk about any number of things in terms of toxicology for hours and hours and hours, but 95% of it wouldn't have any relevance or be useful to the EHS professionals that I'm trying to teach. And I think that's really the key emphasis in this series, and something I'm really proud about advancing within the toxicology committee and within the materials that I am presenting to this community.
So obviously, student feedback on this new webinar series is really important for you to be able to, hone this to be able to deliver the course that you're trying to deliver here. So what other student feedback have you received that you had to take to heart here and consider?
One of the important pieces that I noticed from more than one student was they felt that the lecture could have been longer. It could have been 90 minutes or 2 hours. And what I will say is that I agree with them. However, this series started out as a 60-minute lecture format for a very important reason. I have a lot of experience delivering long, day-long training courses in person, where I can gauge my students' responses, know when I've lost them, know when they need a break. But in this virtual format, which is fairly new to me, I wanted to start on a scale that I felt I could really succeed at, that I could deliver high quality content. So consider this sort of the appetizer. This series, it's 3 one-hour lectures. I do believe you can still learn a lot from them, but the goal or the vision would be that there's an opportunity, if this virtual format works, to expand it and make this kind of training available to a much larger audience, maybe even half day to full day. But certainly I read every single student comment and considered it, and largely it was very humbling. On Friday afternoon, I got all the verbatims. And again, I was just so grateful that these students, these professionals, trusted me with their learning opportunity. But where they have suggested that we expand the format, I absolutely agree. That's not for this first try, but I think down the road, we have some data points to suggest that that could really work.
So for those out there thinking about attending this series, what would you say is the key reason that these webinars are a must attend for OEHS professionals?
Well, first and foremost, I think they will be enjoyable. Based on the feedback from the students, they left the hour feeling more excited about their profession. They walked away with actionable knowledge that they could apply immediately in their day-to-day jobs. And that, it may sound trite, but I believe the key to longevity is to actually, professional longevity is to actually like your job. I'm a toxicologist and I love what I do every single day. Not all day, every day. I have bad moments, but I think a piece of that is that my career has been about learning and evolving. And this course, I'm confident people will leave the hour feeling more excited about what they do, more confident, and again, more empowered to give feedback when they receive professional development content that maybe misses the mark. Because again, the people out there creating professional development content, they are experts. They're volunteering in most cases huge amounts of time. And I think we have to know to ask for more. But I think that, again, you'll learn about the organ systems, you'll learn about the liver, you'll learn about genotoxicity, carcinogenicity, respiratory sensitization. That's all important, but you'll also learn practical strategies that you can use on a day-to-day basis to use your primary hazard communication instrument, your safety data sheet, more efficiently, and also not be shy about giving feedback to your subject matter expert when they're talking in a different language. We have to not be shy about that.
No, it makes sense. This is actually great stuff. Renee, thanks so very much for joining us on this episode of Healthier Workplaces. And the AIHA 3-part occupational toxicology webinar series is ongoing now. So this is
Yeah.
definitely something that the audience should look into. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
So that's our show for this week. Until next time, I'm Bob Krell. Stay healthy.